You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now present the Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase.
Un saludo para todos los oyentes de Radio María Canadá. Soy Liliana Monroy, voluntaria y presentadora del programa Transformar mi Presente. Inicié en el año 2024, cumpliendo ya más de 2 años dentro del equipo. He conocido diferentes personalidades, talentos, culturas y nacionalidades en un solo lugar con una misma intención que nos caracteriza y nos une: el amor a Dios, a nuestra Madre María, a la Iglesia Católica, más el espíritu de evangelización y servicio. En Radio María Toronto tenemos espacios para alimentar nuestra fe a través de espacios de oración, Eucaristía, talleres, retiros y diferentes actividades para compartir y apoyarnos. Es una experiencia que nos permite aprender, aportar y seguir construyendo nuestra fe. Nuestra voz cruza fronteras y llega a muchos corazones. Es maravilloso saber que podemos llevar un mensaje de esperanza y que Radio María Canadá nos orienta y apoya.
You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now continue with the program, The Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase.
Welcome back to the Health Hub. Please do follow us on our social sites. We are on Instagram, X, and Facebook, and we are at the Health Hub RMC on those locations. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
I'm so happy to be here, Cathy. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I can't wait to dive into, we've had an FDN practitioner read on before, and it really had a good response. And I think
he is not just a practitioner, but actually the founder of our methodology.
Absolutely. yes, he is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with what you do now, it's completely relevant now because there's more and more testing coming on the market. There's more and more functional work being done. And I think, bringing you full circle here with what you do can be very poignant for a lot of people. But before we get into our heated topic of cortisol and all the things that can shoot off of that, why don't you tell us about you and walk us through those moments when you realized your body was breaking down and you needed to go in a different direction than you were heading?
Such a relevant topic because I think your listeners will know this and you will know this, that it doesn't happen all at once. It happens over the course of time. And we as human beings are very adaptable. We are survivalists. We can make it work in the best of times and we can make it work in the worst of times. So when we have a falling baseline of feeling good, we just adapt. We get used to it. And it's hard for us to sort of look back and be like, did I feel better 2 weeks ago? Did I feel worse 2 weeks ago? That's a hard thing to keep track of. So I think I was working in a nonprofit where we were a direct service organization for victims of domestic minor sex trafficking and commercial sexually involved youth.
That's a tough area.
It was a heavy topic. Yeah, it was a heavy topic. And so as I was in a very stressful environment, a very cortisol-driven environment, everything was life and death. Every time the phone rang, is a life and death situation. Every time somebody walked in the office, it was a life and death situation. And I didn't have great boundaries around all that at that time. I think that I was looking for a way to find myself a valuable and noble human being. And so I took on a job like this so I could sort of prove, it was social proof to the world, right? Like, I'm a good person. I'm a worthy person. Look what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
But that also meant that I craved a huge amount of validation. And so when the girls would say, "Oh, I need you to do this for me," or "I need you to do that for me," or they would call me at 3 o'clock in the morning when they were having an emergency. Like, of course, I was going to like pop up and do that. So that's sort of the context around which my baseline started falling.
That's such a good quote, our falling baseline of health. And that is really so relevant. And I think it's, you can explain this more. When we come to having this baseline of our health, I mean, as you just said, it changes. It doesn't necessarily always get worse, but when it comes to our health, where do you want people to look as establishing a baseline that we can reference? How do we have that baseline or establish that? At what age do we need to start doing that?
Yeah, this is a great question. And the way that we do this within the FDN world is that we have an assessment where we look at ourselves in 7 categories and we score ourselves every 30 days. And that's the way that we figure out our own baseline and our client's baseline. But I think that if you're listening at home and you're like, I want to start doing that, one thing that you can do is for 2 weeks, you can look at yourself 2 times a day, consistent times every day. So 9 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe. And just rate yourself. How's my energy? How's my mental focus? How is my mood? How is my digestion? How is my detoxification? Like, am I having a bowel movement every day? Am I having a bowel movement every 3 days? And how's my sleep? And just sort of track that every day for 2 weeks, and then do that once every 6 months.
But how do we know that our baseline is a healthy one
Oh, well, you're not going to know that without,
without the proper testing,
yeah,
right?
without the proper testing and establishing that sort of a baseline. But if you just want sort of like, here's how I can track how I myself am feeling, that is one way to do it, is get 2 weeks worth of data at these two consistent times a day, every day for 2 weeks, and then look at that every 6 months and say, is it better or is it worse than it was 6 months ago?
And how much of the change would you contribute to a play in our cortisol levels?
Let's 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 continue on that path. Let me tell the next piece of my story, and then we can connect this all to cortisol, um, if that's
Perfect.
okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
absolutely fine.
Okay. Okay. Fantastic. So, I was noticing that I was showing up to work with sort of less enthusiasm. I was showing up to work with less focus and dedication, and I started to wonder, am I just unhappy with my life, or am I sick? And I think that's also an intersection that a lot of us can relate to, particularly in our mid 30s, kind of starting there, where it's like, oh, is this physical or is this emotional?
Mhm.
And so we start doing things in our mid 30s or early 40s, like changing jobs or going back to school or moving cities or getting in and out of relationships, only to find that like it doesn't change anything, that we're still showing up in a lackluster way, not being able to focus, not being able to maybe to sleep as well. We start kind of self-medicating with lots of coffee or maybe some alcohol at night to help us fall asleep, maybe a Tylenol every day for that tension headache as it comes on. And this is a really important place to start paying attention. And so when I got here, I did what most of us would do, and I went to my standard conventional doctor,
Mhm.
and he ran the standard conventional diagnostic tests, and he said, "You're fine.
Yeah.
You're just depressed." Sort of adding to this uh, evidence that I did just hate my life, and it wasn't physical. And so I just, put my head down and worked harder, as I think a lot of us do at that point.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, did you feel you were dismissed or did you feel like, okay, then I'll just try and do better?
Um, I've I definitely, at that point, I felt, all right, this is me, and I just have to figure out a way to do better. I
Okay.
just have to figure out a way to be more motivated. I have to figure out a way to be more engaged. And I started talking to my peers, and it seemed like everybody was kind of going through this. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, this is aging. This is what aging looks like. And I talked to my parents about it, and they were like, yeah, welcome. You
Welcome to the
know?
club
You
where more
thought
and
you were
more,
invincible? Guess what?
yeah.
Yeah,
This is
you're
where
not.
reality hits you between the eyes.
Totally, totally. And so you get all this messaging like from the doctor and from your peers and from your parents and from everyone that like, yeah, welcome to this stage of life. This is what it looks like. This is why adulting is hard. This is
Mhm.
why, nobody's having fun at this
Exactly.
age.
Yeah, you kind of just take it as it is and move on, hoping to
Ex
find those glimmers of joy in the day.
Exactly. Yes. And so I did that for a couple of years, like a good soldier, just put my head down and I was like, all right, this is a me problem. Um, and then the baseline kept falling. It just kept falling and falling and falling. And suddenly I was in this place that I would term chronic fatigue, where being out of bed for longer than 4 hours was super challenging, where you could sleep for 12 hours and it still felt like you hadn't slept at all and you woke up feeling more tired. And it and I just sort of had an inability to function normally. Kept going back to doctors, kept getting the same diagnosis of everything looks normal.
Hmm.
This is all in your head. So that's when I sought out the world of alternative health, where I was like, all right, I'm done with these standard guys. Like, obviously, there's something missing in this
Right.
process. And I think maybe a lot of us who are on this self-healing journey can relate to this too. We all go into this phase, which at FDN we call the cycle of trial and error, which is like, all right, let me just look on Dr. Google and let me listen to every podcast I can. And let me go to all the health conferences where they're selling all the gadgets and all the supplements and all the stuff. And I'm just going to start trying stuff.
Hmm.
Just going to start trying it and see what helps. And
Yep.
I
See
think
what
this is,
sticks.
yep. And this is the point where we all start spending a bunch of money, where we all then have like closets full of gadgets and supplements that didn't do anything for us, or maybe did something for a minute but didn't help in the long run, or maybe even made us worse. Um, and I think that this actually kind of adds to our shame spiral because we're like, was the doctor actually right? It maybe like, this worked for my friend, but it didn't work for me. That I changed my diet. This worked for that person, but not me.
Hmm.
Like I'm beyond help, or maybe I am just depressed, like the doctor has been saying. Maybe this isn't real. Maybe I'm just sick in the head. And so I think all of us get there too. And thankfully, I just by chance found FDN, which is a functional lab training program, and I learned how to do functional labs.
Hmm.
And I want to take a minute here to talk about why a functional lab is different from what the doctor ran and why that had different results. So the doctor, bless their hearts, like they are doing the best they can. They are trained to identify a catastrophe. And the catastrophe has a name, and that is called a diagnosis. So it's like, oh, you are experiencing this catastrophe called heart disease. You are experiencing this catastrophe called Cushing's disease. You are experiencing this catastrophe called liver failure.
Hmm.
That's what the doctors are there for. They are trained for catastrophic failures of your body. So a lot of us are not in this place where we're having a catastrophic failure, but we certainly don't feel good. And that's this sort of gray space between being healthy and having an actual disease. And in the gray space, the doctor has no training and the doctor has no tools.
Hmm.
So this
Yes.
is where functional testing shines. This is what functional testing was made for. So instead of asking the question, what disease do you have? A functional lab asks the question, out of 100% function, how much has been lost and where has it been lost?
The thing too with the functional testing and the thing too with this gray area is that if unattended, if the testing, proper testing isn't done and this gray area is unattended, attendant, it can lead to those
Oh,
catastrophic
absolutely. That
diseases.
is correct. That's correct. If you stay in the gray area,
Yeah,
assuming that
you
it's
won't
just
stay there
you,
for long.
you will
Yeah.
continue on to the continuum of disease.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great point.
And I think that's why the functional testing is so important when you're not well. And honestly, Elizabeth, I think we're finally coming out of that phase where people are accepting it's just the way it is. I think, even when we go to the seminars and we try different things, at least it's building a knowledge base and it's giving us a list of questions. And I think that's why the functional testing is so appropriate at this stage.
100%. 100%. Um, and I would recommend to anyone that no matter what stage of health you're in, whether you feel super, super good or whether you're starting to be in that gray area, that you get functional testing because no one is at 100% function. So even if you're feeling like I've got really, I've got really robust health, you're going to find some things to improve, which is really, really empowering.
And as you pointed out before, and as we talked about before, having a baseline is key. I think for most people, their baseline would be a CBC, a complete blood count.
Yeah.
And I think that's, sort of that common area. And if that's where you start, that's great. But there are some areas in the CBC that, ratios that we may not know, things that are not being equated to what we were talking about at the beginning with hormone levels, cortisol levels changing. And I think this is where the functional tests can link A and B. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, that's absolutely appropriate. And the way that doctors read standard blood chem is they just sort of look at what your range is in the moment. They don't kind of look back at the last time you had that test to see like what's happening with it. So for example, I look at my dad's blood chem all the time. He's 83, bless his heart. And so he gets blood chem every 6 months. And his doctor is, in my opinion, the worst I mean, his doctor is great, but his doctor is the worst for just sort of looking at the range right there and saying, oh, it's in range, it's great. So his protein, for example, has been falling in his blood chem for like the past 4 years. Every time he gets a protein, it's lower, 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 lower. It never gets flagged as anything because it's still in range. But at this last blood chem, it was sort of at the bottom of the range. And I'm like, I bet your doctor is not going to say anything to you about this. So please, like I've just looked back at your protein for the past 4 years, and it's just it's falling baseline. It's a falling baseline. And I would like him to respond to that. So could you, I wrote it down for him and I was like, please ask about this. And of course the doctor came in and was like, protein looks good.
Yeah.
And my dad's like, yeah, but it's been kind of a falling baseline. And he said like, doctor kind of raised his eyebrow and looked at it and was like, well, let's just keep an eye on it. But it was not something that he ever would have looked at. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and there's so many things that you can equate in the CBC. Like I said, ratios that they'll pull out different areas. The one area that it's I think underappreciated is the blood sugar area. We have the HbA1c, we have the fasting, and then we have its relationship to many different things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The number can mean many things. And when
can
it
be
comes
influenced by many things. Yeah.
absolutely. And then that, people are starting to get the hang of what blood sugar can do, but even the nuances of testing for it. It can really vary what the actual number is. And it's just, things like we were talking off air about getting your blood work done first thing in the morning as a fasting glucose level. How do things like cortisol impact those numbers?
Yeah, great question. So let's just define cortisol first of all, because I think a lot of us in the functional space have heard about cortisol and just feel like it's this very negative thing. But the body doesn't just have negative things. So cortisol does serve a purpose, and we should be aware of what that purpose is. So cortisol is our primary stress hormone. It is there to help us interact with the environment around us, which is changing in dynamic ways all the time. So, for example, if I'm driving, I'm going to encounter different traffic conditions. I'm going to encounter like people who cut in front of me. I'm going to, see an accident on the side of me. Like all of these things require immediate attention. And blood sugar equals attention. That is what is giving our brain the fuel to think and react quickly. And that is what is giving our muscles the fuel to run or fight or do those types of things. So we can't always, when we are faced with an immediate stressor, like traffic, for example, go to the grocery store, buy food, make food, eat food, digest food. Now I have energy to meet this stressor on the highway. So we need a mechanism in the body that provides energy instantly. And so cortisol, I like to think of our body as having a bank account. And that is sort of our vital reserve. That's our healing ability, is the amount of money in the bank account. And cortisol is energy on a credit card. So it is actually breaking your body down in order to provide this quick energy. So it's taking cartilage or muscle, things like that, and just liquefying it in order to provide blood sugar right now. And so all of us are putting energy on this credit card all day long. And then we are supposed to rebuild when we are in parasympathetic. So when we're taking some downtime, when we're meditating, when we're sleeping, when we're having conversations with loved ones, all of that is when the body's like, okay, now let me pay down this debt on the credit card. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that we are supposed to have a zero balance when we start the next day. But this is under the assumption that stressors are manageable. In the old world, they were manageable. They were big, like a tiger, chasing you around, being the prime example. But if you live through that, then you're going to go back to the cave and you're going to heal from the catabolic damage that cortisol did to you. And you're not going to have another stressor for a little while. And so there is time to pay off the credit card debt. But in the modern world, we got stressor after 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 stressor. So we're breaking ourselves down. We're putting a ton of energy on credit, and then we're shortchanging ourselves in the healing area by not sleeping enough, by exercising too much, by polluting our body, all the things. So our bodies are expecting stress to be, one, intermittent, and two, short in duration. So I want everyone out there listening right now to ask yourselves, are your stressors intermittent? Heck no, they're not. And are they short in duration? No, they're not. So this is how you know that you've got too much cortisol going on and not enough paying off of the debt that cortisol is accumulating.
Well, plus the physiology of what cortisol is bringing to the picture to get you up in the morning. I mean, there's supposed to be a natural spike. And then it's just, we don't bring it down.
Yeah. And so, bringing this back around to morning cortisol, cortisol is supposed to be high in the morning because you have not eaten since the day before. You've gone hours and hours and hours and hours with no blood sugar. And so cortisol is providing that gap in the morning, and then it naturally falls during the rest of the day because the body is assuming that you will make up the deficit with food. So if we're talking about a morning blood draw, let's just think about that in context. So you have to fast for that blood draw. So already your cortisol is high because it's high in the morning anyway. You haven't eaten. You're not going to eat. You probably drove through traffic to get to the doctor for that morning blood draw. And so your cortisol is high because you just went through a stressor to get there. And now you're sitting here at the doctor looking at a needle about to go in your arm.
Yep.
You're also stressed. And so that's raising your cortisol. Now, if we only look at cortisol one time, like that blood draw, we don't get the full picture. We are, one, under the influence of acute stress, but two, don't get this picture of how cortisol is distributed throughout the day. Because as you mentioned, Cathy, it's supposed to be high in the morning and then it's supposed to drop. And so functional testing allows you to look at cortisol within the comfort of your own home so that you don't have to um, uh, subject yourselves to these stressors in order to measure it. But we also look at it 4 times a day. So we're going to look at it in the morning, 30 minutes after waking, because that's sort of its natural peak. And then we're going to look at it at noon and at 4 o'clock and at night. And a lot of times we're going to see great clinical correlation with your cortisol being disrupted, because we'll see like, oh, it was super, super low in the afternoon when I always feel like I want to take a nap. And then it got higher at night when I was trying to go to bed, and that's why I can't sleep. So there's some really interesting information to be gleaned from looking at it throughout the day. But when we are living in this sort of cortisol-driven time where we are maintaining levels of cortisol that are way too high for way too long, that is going to lead to chronically elevated blood sugar, because that's what cortisol's prime directive is to provide blood sugar to get through the stressor. Mm-hmm. So then this is where we want to look at our hemoglobin A1C, because it is a 90-day look back at the amount of blood sugar in going through the bloodstream. And just to get nerdy here for a second, the bloodstream is carrying a bunch of stuff. Among those things is oxygen. And hemoglobin is carrying that oxygen. And blood sugar, when it is in the presence of oxygen, has this sort of rust effect. It gets rusty and crusty. And so if blood sugar is in contact with hemoglobin, it's going to leave a little bit of crust from that oxidative response with the oxygen on the hemoglobin. And hemoglobin lives for 90 days. So this is why it's a 90-day look back. So basically, the lab is measuring what percentage of that sample of hemoglobin is crusty.
Interesting.
And that is your A1C.
You know what? I actually didn't know. I knew that it was a 90-day test of blood sugar. I didn't know the actual mechanics of it. Elizabeth, let's just take a quick break here, and we'll come back and continue the conversation.
You are listening to The Health Hub here on Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are. To contact us and be a part of the show, email thh@radiomaria.ca. We now continue with the program. Here once again is your host, Cathy Biase.
Welcome back to the Health Hub. I'm talking with Elizabeth Gaines, and we're going to continue this great conversation about cortisol, functional testing, and all the other things that that she is so knowledgeable about. Now, we have these tests done. We have a good basis here from our conversation about what cortisol does and how it can impact us. Where are those opportunities for healing now coming from once we have these numbers?
Yeah, I love that question. So what we find with most people is that they are cortisol dominant, meaning they are carrying too much stress for too long. They're living outside their biological mandate. And what that means, because cortisol breaks us down, is that we are constantly more broken down than we are built up. And this is where we start getting these symptoms of not being able to sleep very well, or having joint pain, or having headaches, or having weight that we suddenly can't get rid of around our middles, not being able to sleep, those types of things. But these disruptions don't stay centered in cortisol. Everything in the body talks to itself. So, for example, cortisol is going to say, hey, we are in survival mode because we got 1,000 stressors happening. The external environment is unsafe. We have to start diverting funds from internal environment. And the first thing to go is sex hormones, because sex hormones are there for reproduction. And so reproduction says, you know what? We can't support another life while we are in this fight flight mode all the time. So let me give you some of my money. And now sex hormones start dropping. And when that happens, that's our sort of ability to be present, our ability to be joyful, our ability to want to get up and crush the day. And instead, we're just like, I'm just not really feeling it today. That is classic cortisol stealing our our joy hormones.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on like that. So the immune system says, you know what, I cost a ton of money to operate at full. So let me go on low power mode. And I think of this just like our cell phone, where when the battery gets low, we will put it on low power mode. The screen will still light up, but only at 30% and not for very long. That's now our immune system, our digestive system, our detoxification system. All of these systems say, I can't run on full power. We don't have that much power. So let me turn on not at 30% and not for very long. And now we're not able to defend against getting sick, and we're getting allergies. We're not able to fully digest our food. We're not able to get toxins out of our body, and so they get shoved into storage. This is how these imbalances that start with cortisol migrate through the body. And this is why it's important to get functional testing in all of these areas, not just to go to a practitioner who says, sounds like cortisol, so let's just test cortisol, or, oh, sounds like hormones, let's just test hormones. Because if hormones decided they didn't have enough money, then every body system has decided it doesn't have enough money. So going to a practitioner that's going to test everything is vital for being able to identify where the bank accounts are low. And if we can identify enough bank accounts and get more money into those bank accounts, then we can raise function overall.
Okay, when it comes to replenishing the bank accounts, when we're talking about cortisol, and I think as we're elucidating more and more this information, not just with our show today, but in general, the basis of many diseases and many serious diseases can come from a cortisol imbalance. And whether you want to tag stress as the cause or not, that's kind of in that gray area. But when we're talking about cortisol, and the next question will be about, how do we fix this? There is stress from how we think, and there is stress from our physiology. And to unpack all of those in the different spaces could be next to impossible, because when you talk about, I've had a horrible day, I'm dealing with all these things, now my gut's upset, now I'm not digesting, now we're impacting blood sugar. It becomes this convoluted emotional impact, physiology, and then this circle where now we don't know what's causing what, the chicken or the egg. So I think, that's the way I'm looking at it, the way I'm seeing how we're talking here. How do you tackle this?
Yeah, this is a great question. So for us, we think the root cause is a fool's errand, because like you said, it's the chicken or the egg. And assuming that there is just one root cause is also an assumption.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is multi-sourced. As you've alluded to, there's physiological stress, there's emotional stress, there's environmental stress. So we break this down into 3 categories. First of all, we recognize that stress is cumulative. So it is I define stress as anything that costs money out of the body's bank account. There might be a stressor that costs a huge amount of money, like I hate my job, or I'm constantly fighting with my spouse. And there might be stressors that cost a tiny amount of money, like the aluminum in my deodorant that I put on every day. Mm-hmm. So the more stressors we can identify and remove, the more money we're saving overall that's never coming out of the bank account, and the more then is available to go upstream for healing.
I might add one more thing there is
Please,
medications that people are taking can add stressors to the body.
Absolutely. So we break up stress into 3 separate categories. One is physical. That is the medications that we're taking. Are we sitting for too long every day? Are we exercising too much? Are we pounding our bodies with coffee? Are we having alcohol to go to bed? Does my job require repetitive motion, like my acupuncturists or my massage therapists or my chiropractors out there? Do I do too much at my job? Am I constantly standing on my feet like a server who has a 12-hour shift? All of those things are physical. Then we've got our mental emotional stressors, where it's the past traumas and the fights with the spouse and that sort of ennui of like, am I meeting my life's purpose? Like, what am I actually doing here? All of those things go into the mental emotional bucket. And then we have our third category of environmental stressors. Like we live in a toxic soup that when our body looks back in its ancient memory isn't there. The environment is pristine. Like we were all drinking organic spring water. We were all eating organic food all the time. And that's what the body is assuming that the environment is still like. And now we live in this mess where food is poisoned and we're taking a bunch of prescription drugs and water has a bunch of chemicals in it. And so we start at home and we take an inventory of how clean is my water? Do I have a house filtration system? Can I put a countertop filter on my water? What am I cooking in? Is it Teflon or is it something that's a little bit more chemical free? What am I storing my food in? Is it plastic or aluminum? Am I drinking or eating out of cans? Am I cleaning with chemicals? Am I putting chemicals on my body with my personal care products? So like all of these things contribute to the picture of stress. And when we remove them, contribute to the picture of healing.
But does the functional testing pinpoint where to start? Or does it say these things are out of kilter and let's tackle each of them?
Yeah, the functional testing is going to tell us what the bank account balances are. It is up to the practitioner or the self-healer to then figure out what is taking money out of the bank account. And this is where working with a practitioner like an FDN helps, is because we do this very comprehensive survey of these three different categories of stress and help our clients sort of walk through that. But it's very important, as you say, to identify all of these healing opportunities and take as many stressors off the table as possible so that money stays in the bank account.
Are there patterns that you see over and over again in the testing that really indicate a high cortisol driven person, a high stressed person?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So stress has its own pattern. And it depends on where you're seeing this person within the cycle and how they are presenting, which is what we call clinical correlation. So when somebody is under chronic stress and they are still got a lot of money in the bank account, there's still plenty of vital reserve, then the body's going to be able to produce a ton of cortisol and keep it up there for a really long time, doing tons of catabolic damage because in its mind, this stressor is going to resolve at any moment. So we're just going to keep meeting this with cortisol, cortisol, cortisol. Now, if you test a person at that stage, you're going to see a huge amount of cortisol. You're going to see like, this is what we call acute stage, where there's just a ton of cortisol all the time. But the body can't stay there. And so cortisol starts to fall as the body gets tapped out and is like, wow, we are way too catabolic. And once the cortisol starts falling, now you have this relativity problem of, cortisol may be in range, exactly where it is supposed to be, but it doesn't feel as good as when cortisol was way, way, way higher. And so we start getting these symptoms, even though cortisol may technically be good. And then if we're continuing on this stress journey, which we all are, we're going to fall into this exhaustive phase where it's like, wow, I can barely produce any cortisol at all because my body is just tapped out. And so now I'm exhausted all the time and I'm not responding to stress well, and it's hard for me to get my mind in gear. So that's generally the cycle that we see. Now, even as somebody's cortisol is falling, they can still be cortisol dominant. And that's the trick. And this is why we look at it in relationship with our anabolic hormone DHEA to see, like, am I still more broken down than I am built up, even though my cortisol's low? And for most people, that is the case. And so we definitely see that pattern in lab work a lot, that no matter where cortisol is within that cycle, we still see that it is dominant in comparison to its natural counterbalance, DHEA. And so people are still cortisol dominant, still catabolically dominant, still in debt on this energy credit card, no matter how low cortisol is.
Do you do testing for adrenals where cortisol is produced? Are the adrenal glands specifically, or the kidneys specifically tested to see if they are being impacted by the necessity for continual production of cortisol? Is there a test for those glands?
Yeah, so the adrenals mean adrenal, which means it's this little sort of like um, it's like the size of a grape that sort of sits on top of both of your kidneys.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a gland on top of an organ. It is not the kidneys per se that are involved in this. It is just the adrenal glands that sit on top of your kidneys. And that is where cortisol is made. So in testing cortisol, you are testing the function of the adrenal glands. Like, how capable are they of making cortisol? And when we're looking at cortisol 4 times in a day, we are also asking the question, are they participating correctly? Or are they really low in the morning and then spiking up at noon and then low again in the afternoon and then spiking up at night? So all of this is looking at the adrenals as part of that equation of cortisol.
So not specifically testing. So we're testing to see functionality is the result of the production of cortisol.
Yes.
That's how you're...
Cortisol is telling us about
Okay.
how well the adrenals are keeping up.
And what would overstressed adrenal glands or adrenal glands, what could they lead to? Just a crash in cortisol, or are there other side effects?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a crash in cortisol, but also we make sex hormones in our adrenal glands. Not all of them. We also make them in our reproductive organs. Both men and women do that. But we also make them in the adrenal glands. And we make DHEA, which is the counterbalance to cortisol, in the adrenal glands. So if the adrenals are compromised and cortisol is starting to fall, so is DHEA. And like, this is still leading to an overall catabolic state. But also, if the adrenals are starting to get battered, they are in communication with the pituitary gland and with the brain. And this is called our HPA axis. And so if there's miscommunication anywhere along this, where the brain is miscommunicating with the pituitary, or the pituitary is miscommunicating with the adrenals, you're going to see dysfunction all the way along that signaling chain. So it's not just the adrenals where dysfunction can happen.
It's a great big convoluted picture.
It is a great big convoluted picture.
And we don't need to know all, as general patients, the everyday person, we don't need to know the intricacies. We can work with someone who can explain it to us. But I think what you've laid down to the foundation of the picture of how stress, how the adrenals, how cortisol can impact overall health. Now, if someone was interested in getting functional testing or working with FDN, are you in Canada? Are you in where are you based?
Yeah, so we have practitioners all over the United States and Canada, and in several countries around the world. So there's 2 ways that you can work with us. One, you can become a practitioner yourself and go through our training program, which is what I did. You get all of the labs that you learn in the course to run on yourself as part of your tuition, and you become your own first client. Or you can work with an FDN practitioner. Most of our practitioners are virtual, so you don't necessarily have to find one in your area, although you can. So both of these options are available on our website, where you can learn more about becoming a practitioner, or you can go to a work with an FDN practitioner tab and look at our practitioner directory.
But are the tests coming from the countries that you're working with a practitioner from? So
It
if I'm working with
depends on
somebody
which
in
country. Yeah, it
okay,
depends
yeah.
on which country. Yeah, we've got sort of lab partnerships all over the world that work a little bit differently depending on what their rules are.
Yeah, I think that's a little stricter here in Canada, so I'm wondering but there is an
The
avenue.
testing is not strict in Canada. Supplement options are a little bit more limited there, but the testing is widely available in Canada.
Good. Okay. And a website where people can go to source this out?
FDNtraining.com.
Wonderful. Well, Elizabeth, this has been a great show, and I really appreciate you elucidating all this information for us because I think in this time, this day and age, it is so, so very relevant that people have an understanding of this and they have an understanding of the options that they have to heal. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Cathy. It's been a pleasure.
Everybody, we will talk to you next week on the Health Hub.
You have been listening to The Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase, here on Radio Maria Canada.